This is Kim Newlove, host of the Pharmacist Voice podcast, where I share my journey from pharmacist to voice actor and interview a variety of people who use their voices to advocate for something, educate in some way, or entertain so that you can be inspired to use your voice too. This is episode 125, and you can find the show notes with links to anything mentioned on today's show on my website, thepharmacistvoice.com. You can also find my medical narration demo and a link to my online course, Pronounce Drug Names Like a Pro, on my website. That website again is thepharmacistvoice.com. Today's episode is an interview with Dr. Janan Sarwar. It's the first interview in a 4-part Women Pharmacist Writers Series. I'm so excited. Janan is a pharmacist, but she's also a publishing professional, medical grant writer, pharmacy career coach, and founder of Global Bookshelves International, LLC. She currently serves as the Chief Content Officer of the Happy PharmD, as well as a medical resource manager for Continuing Medical Education Outfitters, which is a division of Knowfully Learning Group. She is passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and loves to speak and write about these topics. As a publisher, Janan spent 7 years working at the American Pharmacists Association, working in nonprofit print and digital book publishing for pharmacists, and she has now taken those skills to her new independent book publishing company that publishes children's books, healthcare content, and cookbooks that cultivate and celebrate diversity and representation from around the world. Janan and I met at the 2021 Metapreneurs Conference. She and I attended many of the same sessions. And during those sessions, the insights from her professional experiences blew me away. Not only are her professional experiences different from mine, but the lens through which she looks at life is just a little bit different from how I look at life. Hearing everyone's voices, especially Janan's, made my Metapreneurs 2021 experience richer. I'm so glad we met. During our interview, you'll hear the many ways that Janan uses her voice. Find out how she uses her voice to advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Learn how Janan educates in 2 ways, as a career coach and as a writer. Discover why her daughter started a podcast at age 6, and more. It's a great interview. I think you're going to like it. I could have talked to Janan all day, but I held myself to about an hour. I definitely want to invite Janan to come back as a guest in the future. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Dr. Janan Sarwar. Hi, Janan. Welcome to the Pharmacist Voice podcast. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me, Kim.
You're welcome. It's good to see you again. We are coming to you today by Squadcast. We met at the Metapreneurs Conference in Cincinnati, Ohio last month, which was October 2021. And again, it's good to see you.
Yes, it was such a great conference, and I'm so glad to have made all the connections that I did. It was really fun.
Awesome. Now, how did you even find out about Metapreneurs? I don't think I even asked you that when we first met. What's your story?
Oh, this is a neat story. I found out about Metapreneurs because I have been starting a independent book publishing company called Global Bookshelves International. And along the way, I've been reaching out to a lot of people that I've worked with before in terms of printers and copy editors that I worked with because in my career, I have actually published a lot of pharmacy textbooks. And when I was talking to one person in general, he happened to be a past client of Michelle Fritz. I don't know if I
Oh, cool.
pronounce her last name
Yep,
correctly.
Fritsch. Yeah, Michelle
Fritz.
Fritsch.
I know she's been on your podcast a few times. She's an amazing person. And the conversation I had with that gentleman who ended up actually publishing the book that she has, he said, you know what? You really, really need to meet this spontaneous, entrepreneurial person that reminds me of you. her name's Michelle. And I said, you know what's really funny? My name's Michelle too. I don't know if you know that. My first name is Michelle, but I go by my middle name, which is Janan. So,
I did not know that.
yeah. So by the time I had that connection or that introduction, the email introduction from the printing professional, I saw that Michelle and I had over 80 mutual connections on LinkedIn, yet we'd never met. And when we had our Zoom call, she told me she heard my story. She told me hers and told me about metapreneurs. And I realized how close it would be. And I signed up right away. And it was just a wonderful decision. So, small world.
Yeah. And when you say how close it would be, we're talking about it was in Cincinnati. Metapreneurs was in Cincinnati, and you are where?
I'm in Louisville, Kentucky.
Very good. And that's only what, 2 or 3 hours?
Exactly, 2 hours away. And we now have a zoo pass to Cincinnati Zoo. So, my family and I will be going back to Ohio. So, I look forward to it.
Very good. You actually had a shorter drive than I did. I'm from the Toledo, Ohio area, and it was more like 3.5 with traffic.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but I'm glad you got to go, and it's amazing how the world wants people to meet, and so you do.
It's so neat how connections happen.
Well, I'm glad that we could work on this podcast episode together. And as soon as I met you, I thought you used your voice in such interesting ways. So I thought I'd invite you to come on the podcast to share how you use your voice to advocate for something, educate in some way, or entertain. And I do believe that you do all three. And if I may pick, I would like to start with advocacy. How do you use your voice as an advocate?
Absolutely. I would say the area that I'm most passionate about advocating is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I know this is a buzzword, it's a hot topic these days, but I think it's very important, especially because of how much smaller the world is getting due to the pandemic, and so much the ability for us to connect to each other. Speaking of connections, when I talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'm considering it from a healthcare perspective. I'm also considering it from a research perspective. So, the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in clinical trials. I think it's also important to talk about it in the context of taking care of patients, the underserved, marginalized patients. And then I happen to be a mother, and maybe we'll talk about this later, but I think it's really important for children to understand about the world, about diversity. And what is diversity? It exists in many forms. Diversity is whether it relates to age, gender, ethnicity, where you live. We talked about Ohio and Kentucky, physical ability, the unseen abilities, and religious beliefs as well. So I think there's so much that we all can learn, we can constantly learn, and there are so many biases that exist in the world. So being able to use my voice to educate others and have conversations that kind of make us a little more curious and open-minded, that has been a true pleasure.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. You were talking about advocating for diversity, equity, and inclusion in research, for one thing, and also so many other areas. I guess the question would be, how are you doing this advocacy work?
Yeah, so as it relates to clinical trials, I currently work for a continuing medical education company. And one of the things that we have to do is translate data into practice. And when you see that we have certain disease states, for example, I'm thinking about breast cancer and the disproportionate number of patients that you have in the actual clinical trials, the medications that are recommended for that same population. And then from me, from the perspective of creating and being a producer of continuing medical education, making sure that the information and the evidence is unbiased and accurate to recommend therapies, I think it's a huge responsibility pharmacists have. So I think the way I've been doing it is I have been able to speak to clinical research organizations to find out how are they recruiting patients. And I have friends in this space that One in particular, I think you may know him, Darshan Kulkarni.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
He's a lawyer and a pharmacist, and he believes in the importance and value of this as well. And talking to these groups that are doing this, talking to pharmaceutical companies and asking about their processes and programs, the beautiful thing is I'm seeing that a lot more attention is being placed on this. But I think we also need to consider how that does translate. And the an amazing way, as far as education and continuing education, is that the company that I now work for and where I previously worked for, APHA, the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion, healthcare disparities, social determinants of health, all of these terms, maybe they're buzzwords, but they're important. They're being discussed. And by being able to be involved and working on these projects with individuals, with healthcare providers that are actually interacting with the patient population, I love that I have this fun way of making impact and educating other providers on things that they should know more about.
Yeah, just by bringing it up, you are educating my listeners for sure. I didn't know that in clinical trials, for example, there wasn't a lot of diversity. So, Janan, how did you know there was a problem in the first place?
So, the problem that I identified was when I looked at clinical trials and actually tried to translate data into practice because every day there are new medications that are coming out. Specifically, when I was researching about breast cancer, the incidence of breast cancer occurs highly in Black women. And actually, looking at the study, looking at the data and the percentage of people who are from different ethnic groups, and seeing that disparity, that is what made me think, how are we able to really translate that? I'm not blaming anyone for that because I think there's a lot that goes into participating in a study and even being willing to or being able to. Being in a clinical trial actually involves, having transportation to go to the site or having the time to take off from work. And so that is one of the reasons that maybe some individuals are not participating. So being able to see that CROs, clinical research organizations, and different pharma companies are coming up with innovative ways to include the populations that are suffering from the disease states. It's really very eye-opening. But the real translation is knowing that there are diverse populations that we as healthcare providers interact with, whether it's in a community pharmacy setting or a clinical setting. And so when there's that ability to say, hey, I know more information about your condition based on your genetics or based on your culture, background, there are things at play here that can impact whether, it relates to how they have health beliefs, take medications, or would be honest and open with the healthcare provider. It's really important to understand diversity, equity, and inclusion and how it impacts patient care.
Very good. And what are others doing about diversity, equity, and inclusion when it comes to just globally, research and other issues? What do you see other people doing to help address it? Because I must say, there are a lot of people out there that care, but it's not their particular passion. And I'm sure you know what it's like to have a passion, but you can't always make it somebody else's passion. So let's talk about that. What are other people doing?
First of all, I think that the fact that we're discussing it and that it is part of the conversation that we need to address, talk about, and think about diversity. And as I defined earlier, diversity has many forms. It's not just about something concrete and black and white. There are so many intersections of diversity. So the fact that we're talking about it, that is a new trend, and I'm very hopeful. I actually wrote a children's story recently, and it addresses this. It actually has nothing to do with the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion, but I'll share the premise of the story. It's my three daughters. They helped me write the story as well. And it's a rainy day. They wanted to play outside, but it's raining. So instead of them getting muddy and dirty outside, we called them all in. And my middle daughter, she tends to really want certain things. If it doesn't happen the way that she'd expected, her world is kind of broken. So she said she'd come inside, and this is in the story, if we could bake cookies, with rainbow sprinkles on top. And so, we agreed, and we got the girls together. This is actually a normal thing we do in our house, which inspired the story, baking these cookies. And we baked it, and then they sit down to eat the cookies, and there's a problem. The cookies don't taste good. And Lena, my eldest, realizes the problem. She runs to the kitchen and sees that there was a pivotal ingredient that was missing. It was the sugar. The sugar was missing from the cookie. And of course, you're not going to have the best tasting cookies, but what she decided to do was come up with something that was innovative. In the story, she says, "Hey, Dad, I have an idea." So she comes back a few minutes later, and you see these same cookies that were just sugar cookies, but now they have icing and sprinkles on top. So to make up for the lack of sugar inside the cookie, she put extra sugar on top. Some may call that diabetes. I call that the moral of the story actually is that that's the way I see diversity, equity, and inclusion being treated in the world right now. Super glad that we're talking about it, that there's a missing ingredient, that is the diversity, that they're not included. You can, right now, the way it's being addressed, maybe it's not the most appropriate way it's being addressed, but right now, you do see organizations hiring people of color or having diversity, equity, and inclusion officers at their organizations and their companies saying that we're open to these ideas. I kind of liken that to putting sugar on top or icing on top with sprinkles. But again, I'm glad we're talking about the fact that there's a missing ingredient. The true way to move forward is baking and including. So the word inclusion, what does that mean? Having the people with these diverse voices, ideas, thoughts included in part of the decision making. So if we go back to that cookie recipe, the way you're supposed to bake the cookies is have the sugar in from the beginning. So I think we're going towards that, and that's the hope and the momentum I hope we see in years to come, maybe in our children's generation or the generation after that. But right now, I see the world at large at least discussing this, and I thought that was a really excellent question that you brought up.
Oh, thank you. What an excellent answer. And you are quite the storyteller. I appreciate that. That's
Thank
great.
you.
You're welcome. Janan, books are entertainment, and it sounds like you are writing a book. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So my career has been in book publishing. Very interesting and unique career path that I've found myself in. And the career and the books that I created were all previously about pharmacy. But having children myself and thinking, this is a huge misnomer, thinking that it'd be easy to write a children's book and break into the world of children's books.
You mean it wasn't
I
easy?
Oh my goodness, this idea what I shared has been revised about 50 times, and I'm
Oh, I
still,
see.
yeah. So there's still more to it, the actual what children would really like. But I'm really intrigued about children and what I actually just shared about how I think that the future generation, the world can change, and I'd love to be a part of that. And how I connect all of this and what I think it's really would be fun to share with your audience is this concept of windows and mirrors. This idea of windows and mirrors and how they relate to children's books has been around. I didn't create this or anything, but it's really nice. So, a window book. A window book is a book that you pick up, and this is any of us. So, if I were to pick up a book that's a window, it would be a book that as I open it, it lets me see something that's outside, right? As a typical window would do. And, whether that's a fantasy book or perhaps it's a book about another culture or even as an adult, learning about something new that I'd never learned about before. I'm getting a window into another world. Then the idea of mirrors. Mirrors are books that you pick up because you see yourself in it, reflected somehow, whether it's something that you're dealing with. Maybe, I know with COVID-19, I have friends that ask me, how do you deal with grief? Are there any books that you recommend? And so, when you're looking for books that are mirrors, you're seeking something that either has an example that you want to bring to yourself, or you really just want to help and see yourself. How that relates to children's books is that there have been studies over the past 5 years, as we've discussed, that diversity, equity, and inclusion has been discussed more and more. Well, it's also been discussed in the publishing world. And what they discovered in 2017, that less than 7% of books were about people of color, any kind of specific diversity, neurodiversity to, any kind of diversity. And there was a gap in the market, I would say, since 2017, and this huge recognition of that. There have been more independent book publishers and the mainstream children's book world that have been trying to get these voices. There are nonprofits. There's one in particular I really like. It's called We Need Diverse Books. And We Need Diverse Books tells people that, hey, it is important for children to have both types of books, books that are mirrors and books that are windows. And so in the United States, right now, what I see and what we know, if the data is correct, there are way more mirrors for Caucasian children and not enough windows for them. And then the inverse of for people that are, you've heard the term BIPOC, right?
I don't think I'm familiar with that. I'm sorry.
Sure, I'll spell it out. That's Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. That's
Oh,
an acronym.
I've
Yeah.
read that acronym. Sorry, I've never heard it said out loud. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So, for the other groups of individuals and children that are here in the United States, there are not enough mirrors for them. The solution, the gap that I see, and the easy solution is bring more books that are about diversity, and it's going to help both. Because as I shared before, it's very important for children to read both. Because for children and adults as well, we need to be able to see things and maybe it's emotions and regulate. And, the more you see yourself in a book for children, there are studies that they have more of an interest in reading. And you will see that there are marginalized groups in the United States that also there's a correlation between not seeing themselves in books and not wanting to read them as much. So the more you infuse seeing a character like them, seeing their name in a story, and maybe you've seen these personalized books that are out there. If you can hand a child a book that has their name on it, has a character, them inside it, this can be pivotal. And in fact, I know we're going to probably talk about careers at some point today in our discussion, but there are studies that show that children subconsciously can be inspired by books about certain career paths. And maybe it's about a children's book or maybe even a children's television show like Sesame Street or Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I used to watch that growing up, and they have these segments where they share a career path. These subconsciously can get in your mind and influence what career path you choose later in life. I think that's so interesting. And so we can really make an impact. So that is why I tried to see what it's like to write a children's book. I've been in a lot of groups myself, but I have also just begun an independent book publishing company, and the name of that is Global Bookshelves International.
Congratulations. Wow, you got to have a lot of passion to start a business. So, congratulations on that.
Thank you. Thank
What's
you.
happening with that? Is that the first book that will be published under that the business, that your children's book?
Yeah, so I actually hope to get my book that I wrote published by another publisher, because that is in the book publishing world. It is almost better to, kind of have that instead of being self-published or publish it under your own name, someone else trusting you and publishing it. So I'm in conversations with some publishers about my idea, and that's hence some of the revision that I'm working on. But the books that I'm actually bringing to the table are books that are published from around the world that are already published. They're in English and they meet that niche that I was talking about, that specific purpose. So I'm starting off with a few books from Singapore. The internet connected me because of my daughter who started her own podcast. Because she started a podcast, we started connecting with publishers and people who have created diverse books. And when we made those connections, I started to learn about publishers that are, doing this very thing in their own respective countries. So I'm kind of serving as a bridge to be able to bring their content and sell in North America. And that's the start. And I hope that if anyone's listening, if you're interested in writing a book, whether it's a children's book, you're self-published, or it's a book about healthcare, that's another area I'm very passionate about. The 3 imprints in Global Bookshelves International are children's books, healthcare books, and cookbooks. And I know that sounds all over the place, but there's a reason. And these all are very exciting, and they are very important to me, all 3 of those areas.
Now, if somebody's listening to this and wants to get in touch with you about the book publishing angle that you're connected with, how can they get in touch with you for that specific venture?
Sure, yeah. The email address would be globalbookshelves@gmail.com, but I know you'll probably link in the show notes. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there, and anything, there's a lot that we're covering today. If any of this sounds of interest and you want to learn more, I'm so happy to, share my passions and show others how they can follow a passion as well.
Very good. Well, you are such a great example for everybody, and I appreciate you sharing that here on my podcast. Now, I want to keep this moving because there's so much I want to talk to you about today. I noticed that you talked about your daughter and her podcast. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. So, Lena, she is now 6 years old. Earlier this summer, she told me that she had been really wanting to spend more time with me because I was spending a lot of time at my computer
Yeah,
working, or,
it happens.
it happens. And mom guilt really kicked in. And I was thinking, what can I do, and what does she want to do to spend more time with me? I do try, and I did always try that I would work during my work hours, and when the kids came home, I would spend time with them. But over this year, I did venture into more coaching. I also happen to do career coaching for individuals, and so most of those coaching calls happen late at night when they should be asleep, but Lena wasn't asleep this particular night and really wanted to talk to me. And so that next morning, because I had to say, I'm sorry, I have a coaching client, I really can't speak right now, I'll talk to you later. She was disappointed. The next morning, I really felt guilty, and I said, Lena, what is it that you would like me to do? And I was honestly afraid she was going to say, quit helping people and help us, or I really didn't know what to expect. She was 5 and she's very blunt. So I was wondering what she was going to say, and believe it or not, she said, Mom, I want to create a podcast so I can spend more time with you. And I said, of course, but what would your podcast be about? And, listeners who are thinking, why would a 5-year-old think about podcasts and listen to podcasts and know about that? I will say that part of this is due to my frugality, and also because I try not to give any of my children a device. They do, like a handheld device. They do have a Google Home in their bedroom that on those nights, if I were to have a coaching client, I allow them to listen to bedtime stories that are read by other children on podcasts. So this wasn't a very novel idea. She had been growing up for the last few years listening to podcasts. So this is a mom hack and parent hack for any of you who have children. There are plenty of podcasts out there that read books. So it's the equivalent of audiobooks, but it's free. And so I said, Lena, that sounds great, but what would you really want on this podcast? What would make yours different? Trying to think of, why she's going to do this. And she said, oh, well, I want the stories to be about the stories that we have on our bookshelves. And, what she really meant there is kind of, this pays some respect to the title I chose, Global Bookshelves International. I do take it very seriously to make sure we have books that represent voices of all around the world and all sorts of things, diversity. That's what inspired me, but it also inspired her, and she's my inspiration behind everything. So it's just a lot of inspiration happening, but does that
Yeah,
make sense?
absolutely. It makes me curious, though. What kind of books do you have on your bookshelf if she's not hearing them on her device?
Yeah, so we particularly have books. I subscribe to books that are coming in English from India, from Singapore, as I mentioned, from Africa. These are books that are written in English by authentic voices from these different countries. And I am a little choosy, I'll be honest. I want to make sure what we're reading has value, has morals, and again, is representative. So what you open the books and see and that's what's the value of a picture book. I know we're talking on a podcast now, but there is also some value in seeing. That's the difference and why I'm kind of talking about picture books and not necessarily chapter books. I think representation is important in all spheres, but for the demographic I'm discussing, it really is this younger age that can't read yet. So 0 to 4, maybe up to 6 years old, that are starting to read or that to be able to see themselves in books. The books and the stories that they're listening on the podcast are maybe about more fictional characters or inanimate objects, animals. There are a lot of children's stories about animals, to the point that the studies, and back as I described in 2017, shared that there were way more books about inanimate objects and animals than there were people of color. So that is over time what has inspired me to buy books from around the world.
Wow, I can tell you're choosy. That's good for you. You really have to do your research when you're trying to narrow down to the books that you want your kids to read instead of just what maybe might be on a bestseller list or on the shelves of the local bookstore.
Yeah, and we love going to the library as well, and we're huge advocates of checking out books and taking care of them and taking them back. And it's really nice to see that the library also here in Kentucky really embraces that the books around the world or books about different topics and themes to really open people's eyes. And that's my real hope, is that we are creating global citizens because the world has grown smaller. The connections are easier to make because of technology, because almost everything that everyone's done these days work-wise has proven that you can, in some way or another, do it remotely. And so that makes it easier to work together, work with each other. With that increase of working with each other, with people around the world in different time zones, with different backgrounds, it is so important to prepare the future and ourselves to knowing what that means and how to respect others.
Thank you. That's excellent. Very well said. Yes. Now, back to her podcast, though, I've got to ask, what's it called? Where can we find it?
Wonderful. So her podcast is called Salam Storytime. Salam is an Arabic word for a greeting, which means peace. And Storytime, as you can imagine, it is literally Lena as the main reader, but we have guest readers as well, reading books that we have permission from the author and publisher to read. Now, I will tell you, I have given her the autonomy. She chose the logo, she chose the name, she chooses the books that we read. And because she is now 6 years old, I have really not wanted to put pressure. So you can check us out on Spotify, Anchor, anywhere you listen to podcasts, Apple, etc. We are having more podcasts to come. She has recorded several, and we have some friends from around the world who've wanted to contribute and participate. Lena always tells me it doesn't have to be perfect. And I think that's something that I have to shake out of myself as a pharmacist. So hopefully you'll see many more podcasts to come. And it's really, she inspires me. And I love that she's doing this and that we have this ability to, publishers are giving us permission to share their books and authors are excited about it. And we can get some of these diverse stories out there and get people intrigued. And hopefully we'll have more of these on physically to purchase at Global Bookshelves International as well.
Very good. Yeah, it's good for more than one reason. You're able to advertise other people's books. And then, like you were saying, when they're printed in English, they could also be in your Global Bookshelves International business. That's pretty cool. Now,
Yeah.
in the show notes of Lena's podcast, are you putting the name and maybe some sort of a link to buy that book in those show notes?
So right now we do share exactly where they can find the book, who the publisher is. I think that, these days with not to disparage any company like Amazon or anything like that, but I think supporting local and getting people to support local bookstores, and even if they can't buy the book, just checking it out and seeing if it's at the library, it is so important. Another pandemic problem that I'm really hearing about from parents are the reliance of digital products, phones and iPads and screens because of the remote learning, or everyone's saying that, hey, you can use technology, and it's dangerous in a way. I hate to say it, and we're not really admitting it, but I myself can admit that I have this phantom vibration syndrome sometimes when I think I have my phone and there's a text and I don't even have my phone with me. That we're really connected to these devices, and it's been good. There's good and bad. So I share all that to say that I think that it's so important. I'm not saying you have to buy books in print, but I think having access to physical books has very, very great outcomes for children, because it teaches them patience. It teaches them that the things are not always immediate through the patience, and then also that tangible feeling and that experience with the caregiver. 1 hour of reading a day really has this profound impact on vocabulary, even from children as young as, just infants. So I think that other piece that I will say, that I don't go a day without reading at least one story to my children. And that's what I hope. I'd like to actually speak on a TEDx talk one day. I don't know if I shared that with you. That's my goal or
No,
dream.
it's
But
good to have goals.
if I were to say anything, it would be about the fact that I think we really can change the world for free by just reading books to children, not just your own children, going to a school, a local school, going to a foster home, anywhere where there's children, and reading them some books that do those two things I shared before, mirrors or windows. That has such a profound impact. And I think we won't see it right away, but I really am a firm believer in it. So read a book to a kid.
Oh, I have, trust me. But yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think it's good advice for everyone. Absolutely. There's a lot of value in books, and we have a lot of favorites here at my house too. And you're making me curious about if any of them, really have that diversity, equity, and inclusion going on there, and whether they're mirrors or windows. I'll have to think on that. Thanks for giving me
Yeah,
some food for thought. Seriously,
no
that is cool.
problem. Yeah.
Although this has been an excellent discussion, there's still a piece of your being on this podcast today that we haven't covered, and that's how you use your voice as an educator. We talked a little bit earlier about how you had been in publishing, and you mentioned that you had been in coaching or have been in coaching. So let's talk about coaching and how you use your voice as an educator with books too, not just children's books.
Yes, yes. Okay, wonderful. Well, I can actually keep that analogy we were talking about with mirrors and windows briefly when we talk about coaching, because it is so accurate. We talked about mirrors. As a coach, I hold up a mirror to that client. The coaching that I do right now specifically is career coaching. In the past, not exactly per se, I also helped book coach people. As a
Oh,
publisher, you work with individuals who come to you with an idea, and an idea for a book, and their goal is that a year or two later they walk away with a published book. And over time in my publishing career for pharmacists, I've been able to be involved in over 30 books that have been published by individuals. That's been really rewarding. And the way that I handle that coaching that I would like to describe is, when people come to you with ideas, you hold up a mirror, because sometimes people can't see. Maybe they can't see their flaws, or they can't see, a lot of times it's more, they can't see the things that they're good at, the things that they forgot about themselves. And that's what I do as a career coach. And when I help people with any idea that they have, I'm more of a listener and I'm reflecting back, right? And then windows, I have to bring that piece back up. With windows, as it came to educating for textbooks, and now I work in the continuing medical education space. So how a window comes in is actually talking to faculty or authors or people that are looking for career opportunities, all of these different people, showing them the opportunities they have. So when you look out a window, you're not in your house anymore, right? You're looking outside of what you know, outside of the world and your brain, being able to share, here are the opportunities you have. So when it comes to books, how and what format, maybe your idea that you're saying should be a book really should be a course. Maybe it should be a textbook. Maybe it should be an ebook. And knowing that and sharing that, when it comes to continuing medical education, what format do our learners want to receive the information as well? So I'm creating continuing pharmacy education, medical education, content for nursing. There are a lot of people that are so busy and burned out from working all the time that they want to know the latest on COVID-19 information, but they don't have an hour to spend or they can't go to a conference. So now having innovative ways to have a 15-minute CE program that still provides continuing education, but still has that ability to give the learner what they need, that is an ability that I've learned through a fellowship that I did called Educational Technology Research and Development, a fancy way of saying that I studied for a year the science of how people learn and how to deliver information online, educational technology, utilizing online resources and platforms to deliver content to improve learning. Craziest thing about that is that it still relates and connects to my love of children, because a lot of what we know in adult education is what they have studied and learned in children. So K through 12 education has really informed how adults can learn information in chunks and bites. And so, yeah, so that's the way I use my voice to help people who are trying to create CME, continuing medical education. And then for people who are looking for careers, the windows I show them are the windows of opportunity. So innovative careers, maybe like mine and yours, Kim, or being able to help them recognize what their values are, and then the actual pharmacy career options that are out there. And I'm writing a book right now with Alex Barker called Potential. That we have found that there are over 50 careers that you can have with the PharmD. Just thinking off the top of our heads, and that's not even diving into all the different roles you might have within pharma. Pharma is just one of the 50, and then we've thought about just so many. So I'm really excited to say that people can sometimes feel stuck or feel lost or need that guidance. And I think coaching, or unofficial coaching, like I've done as well, can really open your eyes to seeing yourself in a new light, getting that mirror, someone else to mirror you for you, and then show you opportunities outside because they have that experience or expertise.
Now, if someone wanted to coach with you, what kind of coaching do you do? When you say career coaching, is it somebody who's unemployed or maybe hates their job, comes to you through the Happy Farm D and they want to get coaching? I've never gotten coaching of this kind before. Janan, you have to tell me, how does it work?
Yeah, so I will say it is called the Happy Farm D, but you do not have to be unhappy to come to the Happy Farm D. There are people who are simply looking to get a promotion or to get more opportunities at their job or to get a side hustle or to start a business. And so I think having that coach and having someone come and be that reflection, as I was sharing, it's really valuable. But people who are burned out are I wouldn't say ideal, but the majority of the clients that we have seen. A lot of clients in community pharmacy who are saying that, hey, I chose my pharmacy career for my why, and this was my why. I wanted to help others, but I find myself burned out. I can't even help myself or my own family, and I don't know if I can last in this career. What should I do? And what options do I have out there? And so I'll tell you the truth, a career coach and any coach, and I know you've had coaching of different kinds, right? For business or
Performance
podcasting.
and business for voiceover, yeah, but I haven't ever gone to, I would say, a career coach such as yourself for a
Sure.
pharmacy-related job, so that's why I'm
Yeah.
saying I've never really been to one. So how does it work?
Yeah. So the part that I was gonna relate to anybody who's been through coaching is that Your coach isn't going to tell you exactly the answer for you. They're going to show you and you learn, and it's up to you what you take from it and what you do. They're not responsible. And so what I wanted to say is that with career coaching, there's no, okay, here's your personality and here's what we think and here's how you get your job. It's more strategy to, number one, just have some clarity of what it is, going back to your why, fixing the mindset, because sometimes when people are coming to us, if they are in that burned out state, they're unable to see themselves, hence that mirror to say, hey, here are all the things you have done before, getting rid of any imposter syndrome, etc. So the real process, if you want to get technical, it's typically a 3-month process. Month 1, focusing on clarity. Month 2, focusing on your vision of, what is that career? How does that career fit in your life, and why? What is it actually going to be? And we do have tips and tools to help you. And then finally, the actual career strategy. A lot of times people go at it a little backwards and they think that career strategy, AKA the application process, the CV, the resume, the cover letter, that's the most important thing. We kind of flip it completely around. That's like the last 10%. The 90% of the work is that inner work, the confidence, the networking, the connection building, that how in the earlier stages.
That's very interesting. Are there any success stories that you'd like to share about coaching?
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have experienced this and see the transformation of my clients. I'll share one in particular. She does have a similar background to me in that she's also South Asian. And I don't think that's why we were particularly paired together, but because she had a very innovative mindset and was really open to a lot of unique opportunities, we do have a system of matching clients up with each other. So this client came to me and was sharing that she felt burned out and really wanted to, do more with her life. She was in a retail setting and working part-time, but feeling burned out. And so the beautiful transformation I saw, it didn't actually occur exactly while we were coaching. I will admit she did have some doubts when I was sharing that, hey, if you follow this, people are going to come after you with jobs. And she just really didn't see how that could be possible. But the beauty of this person is that they have now gone on to be very successful in a very unique career path where they are doing medical writing and working from home and very happy with the salary, with the benefits, and with the environment, with the people they're working with. So I thought that was really an inspiring situation, and getting to stay in touch with these people that you connect with as a coach, and they just become part of the people that you want to stay in touch with forever, and see how they're doing. Another person that I really love to think about is Sam. He actually doesn't mind me sharing his name. He worked in independent pharmacy, and he decided that it was time for a change. And while we were coaching, he felt so confident about this coaching process that he quit his job during the coaching process without one actually lined up. But it was because his level of burnout was so severe. And so it was just really also amazing to see him transform. And as he was from a very stressed state to being able to have time off and take care of things that he said he'd put off for years, whether it was medical appointments or taking care of things to fix up a house or seeing his mom. And so, I really appreciate knowing that there are ways to find a way out. And now he's really happy doing a consulting job. So he did have a happy ending as well. And I think the more amazing thing is that people who work with Happy PharmD walk away with knowing that this job doesn't have to be a forever job. And I think one thing that I wanted to share also, because I know we talked about so many varying things today, from publishing to children's books and sugar cookies and all of these things, and also pharmacy and CME, it's that I think there's a way that we should also rethink the way we think about careers. And when we ask our children, what do you want to be when you grow up? And that anxiety some people have of tying their career. So for us, most of you listening, pharmacists, and that identity that you have as a pharmacist, being who you are. And that is something I also see in the clients, that they see that they're a pharmacist, and if they lose their position, or maybe they may not keep their license or need their license in the next role that they take, it's a very emotional thing to walk away from a job. That's actually a big part of the coaching process as well. Not just how to find the job, but how to leave a job. There's a lot of psychological things that happen, a lot of emotional things that happen when you leave a position, especially if you've been there for a long time. So
Mm-hmm.
being able to help others with that is really rewarding. But I think the point I'm also making is that the clients that we have, so Sam and others that I've discussed, they can now, because they know these processes of how to find a job, how to connect, and how to network, it doesn't have to be a forever job. It's part of the career journey. They're okay that if it doesn't work out, or if they get in that field and it's not as what they thought it was going to be cracked up to be, they have the skills and tools to then pick up and try again and find another job. And although I have not been a person to hop from many jobs, you can tell that I've done a lot of different things. And it's that I've allowed these passions, the creative things, to not stop me. And now I've been able to culminate all of these creative passions into my current career, and I couldn't be happier.
Congratulations on your success, and congratulations to your clients on their success too. Now, how would somebody get in touch with you if they wanted to do coaching with you through the Happy Farm Day?
Yeah, I would really invite everyone to visit the website, thehappyfarmd.com. We have all the information there. So feel free to check out thehappyfarmd.com, and you will be matched with a coach. There's a growth advisor that can speak to you and answer all the questions. There are courses and group coaching packages and one on one coaching, and it's just a pleasure. So I really hope that anybody who feels lost or is trying to think of something new to do, there are people that can help you.
Thank you for sharing that. Sometimes people need to hear encouraging words like that, that there's somebody with a plan waiting for you on the other side of that website. And that's a comfort. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Moving on, next, I'd like to talk a little bit about how you use your voice as a writer. We talked about how you use your voice as a writer to write continuing medical education. I'd like to know a little bit about if that is a side business for you, or if you are employed by somebody to do that, and also what kind of medical education are you writing? I think you mentioned pharmacists and doctors and nurses, but I just want to make sure we dive into that a little deeper before we wrap up.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I am employed by CME Outfitters. They're located at cmeoutfitters.com. It is a subsidiary of a larger company called Knowfully Learning Group. The CME that I'm discussing is to be provided via video or in real life for healthcare providers. So this company, CME Outfitters, is a joint accredited company, meaning that it has joint accreditation to give continuing education to pretty much any kind of healthcare provider. And so when I'm writing, I'm more helping the faculty create their slides and put together these presentations. The other way I use my writing skills, though, is with something that is a side thing that I do, kind of infrequently, but a passion of mine. And it's writing healthcare content for consumers. And that's with a partnership I have with GoodRx. And so there, I'm writing articles, whether it's mostly, I found a niche about pets, so cats or dogs, and how to medicate them with if they have anxiety, and how to know if they recognize these things in animals. So I guess this translates my diversity, equity, and inclusion to say, hey, there's non-human needs as well for pharmacy. So again, I love these unique places I find myself in, but really fun to see, because I think it's important. Pharmacists are compounding or dispensing these products, and GoodRx is a trusted source. So it's really fun to write this and be a part of that, and to have a voice. And so I would love to share that none of these things conflict with each other, which I'm so grateful for all of my various employers, because the work I do with GoodRx, that's directly for consumers. The work I do with CME Outfitters is for practitioners. The work with Happy PharmD, I am taking a little bit of a back seat to the coaching, and now more helping the company with the content development, because that's a area that I know a lot about, and the strategy and marketing. And so it's just really fun to do. And again, as you know, that the main goal of that company is to help burned out pharmacists. And so far, that's not an area that CME Outfitters is undertaking. But if it does, I'm sure I'll be able to figure out how I can help both sides and make sure that the world is a better place and than I found it. That's one of my goals too.
Well, that's a good goal for sure. How did you get into writing in the first place? That's not something in pharmacy school that we particularly do a lot of formal education with, is it?
You're absolutely right, and I think all of this I stumbled upon in a little bit of an accidental way. I would admit that I've never been considered as a child to be the best writer, but maybe you said before on this conversation that I can be a storyteller. And I kind of see all of these roles that I'm talking about in being able to tell a story. So, with the main amount of writing that I do for CME Outfitters, it's actually not the programs that we put on, but it's the grants that I write. So, what is a grant that you would write for continuing medical education, you may ask? Well, in a story, I'll say, imagine a company like mine or any company that's trying to educate healthcare providers requesting a pharmaceutical company for grant funding. And so it's, in essence, basically it's a story to say, hey, dear pharmaceutical company, I know that you have products in this space, in this therapeutic area. Here are the gaps that we see in practice that is evidence based and what needs to be taught to the healthcare providers. Here's the formats and innovative ways that we know that we can present this information. Um, and as a lot of times these pharmaceutical companies have call for grant applications or requests for proposals, and then other times there is no actual proposal in place, but my role is to actually write these up from start to finish. So writing a proposal, and then they're submitted, and then we see if we actually were awarded the funding or not to put together these educational activities. So it is not something I learned in school. It is not something I knew about even too many years ago. But I think the part of what I learned from the Happy PharmD of how to become an indispensable pharmacist is a lot of it is having connections, being at the right place at the right time. So I will admit, in my interview for this company, one of the number one requirements was experience writing grants. And the thing I'm admitting is I had zero experience. That was the most important thing on the job application. I had zero experience, but what I did have is the ability to say that although I haven't done a grant specifically, here is the writing I have done, and here's what I believe. Here's a story that I think that why you need these grants and what I would do. Here's the approach I would take and how I would do it. And I think that's how I got my job, even though I didn't have the experience. That's another pearl I'd like to share with your listeners, that you don't necessarily have to have all of the job requirements that seem so required in order to get a job.
It's not always matching, is it, Janan?
Right. It's not. It's not.
Yeah. Some people think just because you're a pharmacist, every job you ever need to have from now until you die needs to have the title pharmacist in it. Well, I can tell you, I'm a voice actor and a podcast host. Neither of those has the word pharmacist in it, but I use my
Yeah.
identity as a pharmacist. Everything that I've learned in my whole entire career, I can put into what I do now.
Yes, absolutely. From what we're doing, I know with the pronunciations and even helping other pharmacists, hopefully with their own podcasts. I think maybe one day another. I don't have time for this, but one day I'd love to see a podcast about just short videos or audio segments about how to help different patient populations as far as that diversity, equity, and inclusion angle. So I think having that in just a very 5-minute podcast, learning about, a different culture or group and knowing something that maybe someone didn't know before would be really cool. Maybe one day.
Yeah, and I think that would be awesome if you would host something about diversity, equity, and inclusion without even using that vocabulary and just
Yeah.
exposing all of us to maybe some of the medical decisions that need to be made for different ethnic groups, people of different races. I think all of us know that certain people are more at risk for certain diseases. Let's let's bring those into the light in short bite-sized chunks. That's my proposal.
Yes,
Yeah, and you could
I love
host
it.
it. There you go.
I love it, I love it. That sounds like a brilliant idea, and I think it would be very valuable. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Janan, as we wrap this up, is there anything else you'd like to share?
I've had a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for having me here. I hope that everyone learned just something from this and that you have advocates and supporters, and that there are unique paths that you can follow with your pharmacy career, even if it's just as a side thing that you do.
Awesome. Well, I've learned plenty today and thank you so much. I feel like I've learned about your advocacy work, how you use your voice as an educator and the things that you do as an entertainer. Good luck to your daughter too on her podcast. I mean, from a fellow podcaster. I think that's awesome that she's doing that. And my son and I actually listened to a couple of episodes and I thought it was very sweet and I heard your voice and I believe your husband's too. So, yeah, you guys keep on doing that. Much success to you.
Thank you. Thank you. We're fans of yours as well. Because my husband's also a pharmacist. So thank you for doing what you do.
That's right. Oh, my pleasure. I hope we'll see each other in person at a conference again in the next 12 months or so, because as soon as we met, we clicked. And yeah, I'd like to keep the good times rolling. Thanks again for being on the
Absolutely.
podcast today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
What a great interview. I love that conversation. Diversity, equity, and inclusion affect all of us. I have a son with autism. He is not exactly included like typical kids are. He's in a special classroom, right? He doesn't talk, he doesn't read, write, or speak. And that makes him different from others. And for him to have books that are about him might mean something. Books that are about kids like him. My son Craig and I read a lot of books together. I read books to him. And I gotta say, what Janan was talking about with windows and mirrors really struck a chord. I want to be a little bit more intentional about the picture books that I show him. I know he's 18, but he still kind of has the mind of a toddler. I honestly don't know what he comprehends, but I will admit that I still read him sometimes picture books. I prefer the young adult books because they have more of a story, but he still picks the children's books. So we're reading Nuffle Bunny. We're going on a bear hunt. We're reading Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. And that's okay. We're spending time together. And like Janan said, it's important for children to be read to. I know that he's 18, but I really still feel like that message hits home. I'm going to be more intentional about the books that we choose. I believe it was Janan who said that Caucasian children need more windows and fewer mirrors. So I'm saying that that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to attempt to look at more books that are windows rather than mirrors. And Janan did tell me about a book called All Too Much for Oliver. It's about someone with challenges who has sensory overload. That is something that my son sometimes experiences, especially when babies cry. I think that he would like that book, so I'm going to check that out. Something else that I noticed ever since I had this conversation with Janan is that my local bookstore, it's called Gathering Volumes, it's right here in Perrysburg, Ohio. They have a circular that they send out periodically through the year, and it's got pictures of books and descriptions of books. And I don't have it in front of me as I record this on November 28th, 2021. But what I can tell you is that there were a lot of books that I think could be interpreted as mirrors for people of color. I think they're doing a decent job of advertising books for people of all colors. And that was reassuring to see, especially since, I learned a lot from Janan that there aren't enough mirror books for people of color. And like she said during the interview, I think we're moving in the right direction. If that one flyer is any indication, I would totally agree. I live in a very rural part of the country. I'm in Northwest Ohio. The population of my little town that I live in is mostly Caucasian. And you would, I guess, expect that some of the books or most of the books that are in that flyer would be geared toward Caucasian children, but they're not, and that's the beauty of it. We need more books that are windows. Thank you again, Janan, for being on the podcast. I learned so much, not only about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also about 6-year-olds having a podcast and medical writers. There are so many opportunities for pharmacists out there, and as a coach, I know that you are just helping them explore that and do that inner work and find those jobs, those next jobs that are right for them. So again, Janan, thank you so much for being on my podcast, and I'll close by saying thank you for listening to episode 125 of the Pharmacist Voice podcast. Please visit thepharmacistvoice.com to read the show notes. There are a lot of links in the show notes today. You'll find links to Dr. Janan Sarwar on LinkedIn, her daughter Lena's podcast called Salam Storytime, Global Bookshelves International, LLC, the Happy PharmD, CME Outfitters, Metapreneurs, and more. Check out those show notes. Again, they're at thepharmacistvoice.com. If you liked this episode, please share it with a friend and subscribe to or follow the Pharmacist Voice podcast in your favorite podcast player to get each new episode delivered to your smartphone every time a new episode comes out. Thank you again for listening.